So welcome to the channel. In this video, taking a look at CBDCs, the debasement of money, how the central banks are ruining things, and why Bitcoin is the life raft. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let's jump on in. Starting with the BTC chart here, can you show me on the chart, sir, where the central banks started to print money yet again? Somewhere in this downtrend here, and since then Bitcoin has been ripping up as we're seeing the debasement of fiat currencies by all different names other than QE. They're just putting new labels on things, but what is happening is the Fed's balance sheet and the balance sheet of other central banks is expanding, thus fiat currencies will become worth less over time and at a rapidly growing pace with the amount of balance sheet expansion that we've seen as of late. So Balaji has been on the podcast rounds. I'm just going to play you a quick clip from Podfast, which condenses down longer form content into snippets, just to give you the crux of the idea of what has been going on in said podcast. Definitely worth checking these guys out. But let's just listen to this for just a few seconds.
The podcast discusses the current state of the financial system and predicts a coming debt crisis due to widespread printing of money. The hosts argue that this is the final big debt crisis predicted by economist Dalio, and that the banks are dead, with Bitcoin being the best solution for those who don't fully trust the banks and U.S. government. They explain the potential problems with the traditional financial system and the likelihood of hyperinflation exacerbated by digital bank runs and the speed of information exchange.
So within the podcast that Balaji and Anthony Pompliano did, they talk about the speed at which information passes, but that is now the speed at which money can move as well. We all have digital banking on our mobiles, and so bank runs can happen very, very quickly. So beneath the Balaji bet was just to emphasize the point that Bitcoin is the life raft from this. He doesn't actually think we're going to hit $1 million in 90 days, but it was all about getting people to get the eyeballs on the documentation he provided under here. So just in snippet format, he suggests that most banks are actually insolvent at this point, and the regional banks are the ones that are going to get blown up, and we've started to see this, and it could end up in just having the 5 major banks in the US remaining, which tees things up nicely for a CBDC. Within some of the information in here, they actually knew this. So the central bankers knew that many of the banks were actually insolvent, but they did not let depositors know. And so he calls this the stealth financial crisis. The media is not really going hard into this, and it seems to be pushed or swept under the rug. And so people are just not knowing about this. And what they're doing is openly lying about the money printing going on. If you watched Jerome Powell's press conference the other day, it was quite shocking to see how flustered he was, the amount of mistakes and the number of times he tripped over his words. He doesn't typically do that. He's under a lot of pressure, but he knows the cracks in the banking system. So this GIF was quite funny because it goes from a few statements about a couple of weeks back where it's like, we're going to supply $25 billion to backstop XYZ bank. And then JP Morgan comes out, it's actually $2 trillion. And then we have this, the Federal Reserve says infinite amount of cash to backstop the system, i.e. Bitcoin should boom. So he says hyperinflation is common and very fast acting, and we could be on the cusp of that in Western societies right now, but of course the US. And what we're seeing is they're trying to block the exits. We're seeing this from the SEC's action, the subpoenas that have been going out. They're trying to stop people from leaving the financial system and going to the alternate financial system, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So the exits could be blocked to trap you in the old system that they are ruining very, very quickly and debasing at an alarming rate. So this was the 19th of March. This is probably a historic point in time now, as we're seeing the credit swaps being moved to a 7-day-a-week facility. So this was the ECB posting this, coordinated central bank action to enhance the provision of US dollar liquidity. This well could be in economics textbooks going forward. So the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, the ECB, etc. now have improved swap lines providing US dollar funding and liquidity, i.e. money printer go burr. So Arthur Hayes posted a quick thread on this. Swap lines, what's going on? TLDR, another way to bail out non-US banks that isn't obvious to the average person. They're just repackaging, relabeling, like we've seen with the games that they do with the media time and time again, no matter what situation it is. If it's financial, health-based, they will always repackage the facts, call them something else, but under the surface, it's all about money printing. He says it's politically toxic for the Fed to be seen bailing out foreign banks when so many small domestic banks need the help. But the Fed can't have foreign banks dumping treasuries into an illiquid market and further effing shit up. Solution: the Fed gives dollar swap lines to major central banks like the ECB. The ECB allows EU banks to give them treasuries at par, and the ECB gives dollars to the banks. Banks can now handle any dollar deposit outflows. ECB gets the dollars from the Fed using those swap lines. The result from this, of course, there is a loss, but no treasuries are actually being sold. Any negative VE P&L is borne by the central bank, who can stomach infinite losses. So the losses come from the Fed's balance sheet, and the swap line balances balloon, which will reflect on the Fed's balance sheet overall. The figures then: 4.4 trillion, the amount of treasury and mortgage-backed securities US banks hold, and an unknown amount of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities that foreign banks hold. He doesn't know the number, but long-term, all treasuries held in the entire developed country banking system can now be lent against at par. Money printer, go burr. And we're seeing this right about now. Swap lines are getting tapped, $590 million in the last 4 days there. And as this happened, Jim Bianco posted this just yesterday. The Fed updated their balance sheet. Now 2/3 of the QT, that is the quantitative tightening measures that they started in 2022, 2/3 has now been undone. As you can see from this, it looks like Jerome Powell took a Viagra and it's gone straight up there. So the Fed's balance sheet is expanding. This means money is being debased. And as a result, we're going to see Bitcoin continue to climb higher as smart investors and rich individuals realize holding cash is a fool's errand. Meanwhile, in crypto land, subpoenas coming left, right, and center for major players. First, a centralized exchange here. This is Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase. Today, Coinbase received a Wells notice from the SEC focused on staking and asset listings. A Wells notice typically precedes an enforcement action. He is going to fight this tooth and nail. They have tons of funds, and he puts together in this tweet thread actually a pretty good case against the SEC. As he says, 2 years ago, they actually reviewed our business in detail and approved Coinbase to go public. They had the IPO. But then we also have SushiSwap also getting subpoenaed here with a Wells notice. They now have to increase their defense fund, so that is a treasury budget from 100K to 3 million to fight these actions from the SEC. The SEC working for the banks here. And as Tom Emmer posts here, the FDIC is weaponizing recent instability in the banking sector to purge legal crypto activity from the US. This is with effectively Signature Bank, Silvergate, and Silicon Valley Bank being taken out the back and shot by the Fed. So what we're seeing here is a war on crypto as traditional finance is failing and failing rather quickly. So this is another point that Balaji posts to, which is the Fed Now implementation, real-time payments in the US, but this is the start of CBDC action, he states. So kind of on a optimistic take, maybe they're just starting to implement things here with the future development of a CBDC, but on Balaji's kind of worst case scenario, all the regional banks start failing here. There's only the big five left. And effectively, that means they're all in bed with the Fed. Government controls banks. We implement a CBDC, and we implement a CBDC in America by July. That is the time frame stated here. And of course, with anything that the government tries to feed you, they try and give you the sweetener as to why it's a good deal. So why it matters. Consumers probably don't realize this, but every time they swipe a debit card, it costs the merchant 23 cents. This cost stacks up and ultimately gets passed on in stickier prices. Of course, the swiping of the cards is the reason for inflation. Good one. Then we look into some of the Fed documentation here. So Federal Reserve actions to support interbank settlement of faster payments. This is the Fed Now tech. This is a direct response to the threat posed by digital currencies and blockchain. So they don't like blockchain, they do not like Bitcoin, they have to bring out their own, is what they're saying here, a CBDC. And if you go through this, it's a little bit spooky here. The main economic attributes of a technically effective currency rest on three functions: as a unit of account, as a store of value, and as a medium of exchange. However, there is a fourth function of money as a means of social control. This is not the Chinese Communist Party we're reading through here. This is directly from the Federal Reserve. Then we had Janet Yellen yesterday speaking. Just listen to this clown show. Effectively, she's saying, privatize the profits, socialize the losses. We're bailing out the banks, but who's on the hook for this? No prizes for first place. Of course, it's the taxpayer. Listen to this crazy shit.
Isn't it a fact that the president's proposed budget proposes $4.7 trillion in new taxes?
It does propose significant additional taxes, yes.
4.7 trillion?
Something like that, yes.
So this is the reason why Bitcoin prevails from here, and this is the reason why I'm very bullish right now on Bitcoin. They're making an absolute pig's ear of this. They're printing money out of thin air, but who is the one who has to pay for this? The freaking taxpayer yet again. How disenfranchised must you be to be a taxpayer at this point in time? Banks are bailed out. The CEOs take enormous gross profits, yet when they fail, the taxpayer comes in and foots the bill. So I think someone who would have been a big Bitcoin advocate, of course, George Orwell, and this is a quote from the 1984 book. Now just think of this in the context of Bitcoin and owning your own money. The quote is, "Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull." The moment we transition to a CBDC, that is the moment that money seemingly means nothing, and we must opt out before it's too late. So I hope you found this one informative, interesting, and if you did and you think it's going to help someone out there, send it on to a friend and get the word out there. The Bitcoin standard is the way forward. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace.